Hi, I'm Nick Haig, and welcome to the World's Greatest Business Thinkers podcast. Chip Conley is on a mission. After disrupting the hospitality industry twice, first as the founder of Vivre Hospitality, the second largest operator of boutique hotels in the world, and then as Airbnb's head of global hospitality and strategy, leading a worldwide revolution in travel. Now he's co-founded the Modern Elder Academy, which is the world's first midlife wisdom school. Chip is an award-winning author of New York Times bestseller Emotional Equations, alongside many other books including Peak, The Rebel Rules, Marketing That Matters, Wisdom at Work, and today we're going to talk about his latest book, Learning to Love Midlife. It's an important book about rebranding midlife to help people understand this life stage that's so misunderstood. With all us living longer than ever before, then this is a very important book, as living longer doesn't necessarily mean we're going to be older for longer. Stay tuned to hear why. Welcome to the World's Greatest Business Thinkers podcast, Chip.
Thank you, Nick. It's great to be here.
Yeah, well, I mean, I've been a fan of yours. I was probably late to the scene. I read your book Peak probably about 5 years ago, and ever since then, we can see a couple of titles on the shelf behind you, of which we'll cover today. But it's great to be speaking with you.
Yeah, I mean, listen, I am a big fan of what you're doing, and I love the title of your podcast.
Well, there's a history to it. In my previous life, I ran another podcast, and this was just one of the series that we ran, where there was 6 episodes, and it just got rave reviews. It just went through the roof in terms of listenership. So that's why I took the plunge and I started to do this full time. So delighted to have you on as a guest.
Beautiful.
The introduction I've just given, I had to keep it pretty brief because otherwise could have gone on and on with the various different accolades you've acquired over the years. And it would have been eating into valuable time we've got for today's interesting discussion. So just to start today from the horse's mouth, if you like, it'd be great if you could give our listeners a potted history of who Chip Conley is, if anyone should even ask that question, and how you got to where you are today.
So I went to Stanford University undergrad and then business school. And about 2.5 years out of business school, I started one of the first boutique hotel companies in the world, based in San Francisco, called Joie, Vivre. And I ran that company for 24 years. So as the CEO, created 52 boutique hotels around California. Wrote a few books along the way, including one that you mentioned. That was my third book, called Peak: How Great Companies Get Their Mojo from Maslow. I love the intersection of psychology and business. And many of my books have been at that very congested, difficult intersection. I had a rough late 40s, struggled for all kinds of reasons. Had an NDE, near-death experience, where I went to the other side 9 times in 90 minutes due to an allergic reaction to an antibiotic. And then I just knew I had to change my life. And so I ended up selling my company at the bottom of the Great Recession and pressing the reset button on my life, and spent the next 2 years having what I call a midlife atrium. It's the space to reflect upon what I wanted to do, how I wanted to consciously curate the rest of my life. And at age 52, I got a call from Brian Chesky, the co-founder and CEO of Airbnb, saying, "Chip, how would you like to help us democratize hospitality?" And I was like, "Ooh, that's interesting. Tell me more." And this was 12 years ago, when most people had never heard of Airbnb. And so I spent 7.5 years there, 4 years full-time, 3.5 years part-time,
Chip, I think I've
as
lost you
what
there.
they called their modern
Can you hear
elder.
me?
I didn't like that at first, because at age 52, yes, I was twice the age of the average person there, but oops, did we lose me for a minute?
I lost you for a minute there, Chip. So we got to the stage where you were just about to get a call from Brian.
Okay. So I got this call from Brian Chesky, the co-founder and CEO of Airbnb, and he asked me if I wanted to help him democratize hospitality. Airbnb was a small tech startup at that time. And I said yes, spent the next 7.5 years, 4 years full-time, 3.5 years part-time, helping steer the rocket ship. And they called me the modern elder, which I didn't like at first because, I was twice the age of the average person there at age 52. But I also realized that when they said, Chip, a modern elder is someone who's as curious as they are wise, I liked that. I liked that alchemy. And so that was a beautiful part of my life and helped the company get up to its IPO and become the most valuable hospitality company in the world. And then, based upon that experience, I decided I was going to write a book called Wisdom at Work: The Making of a Modern Elder, about my Airbnb experience. And while I was writing that book in Baja at a beachfront home I had a Baja aha, an epiphany. Baja is in Mexico, and just south of California. And long story short is I had this idea of like, why not create the world's first midlife wisdom school, a place where people can go and reimagine, repurpose themselves in their 40s, 50s, or 60s. But we've had people younger than that and older than that as well.
Yeah.
And that's what I've been doing now for 6.5 years, with a campus in Baja on the beach, and then a campus here in Santa Fe, New Mexico, on 2,600 acres of regenerative horse ranch.
And where's home? Is it Santa Fe or Baja? Or you just split yourself equally between the two?
I am in both places. I'm also occasionally in both Austin, Texas, and San Francisco. But
Yeah.
the primary places I am are where the campuses are in Baja and Santa
Yeah.
Fe.
Well, thanks for that, very quick history there. And I mean, it is inspirational in terms of the journey you've been on, the ups and the downs, and how you then recreated yourself, and what you're passing back to others, such as me, through the academy and through the books themselves. I'd like to go back for the start of today's conversation, because I'm interested in young Chip. As an entrepreneur myself, I'm interested in what makes people tick. Starting out, and it was 1986. Was this grand plan to start out Joie de Vivre, which is the boutique hotel you talk about, becoming the second largest boutique hotel brand in America? At 26, did you have this grand plan?
I
And also,
definitely did. I did not have a grand plan. What I did have was this: I had chutzpah, so I had a courage and a willingness to try things. When I was a teenager, and even in college, I started a bunch of small businesses. So I had an entrepreneurial bug inside of me that I needed to get scratched, and so that was not too much of a surprise. But then I went to Stanford and Stanford Business School, and when you get your MBA at Stanford Business School, they don't expect you to go 2 years later and buy a pay by the hour motel in a terrible district of San Francisco. Because frankly, if you go to Stanford Business School, you're supposed to go work for McKinsey or Morgan Stanley or Amazon or Google. And this was 1984, a long, long time ago. And I graduated, and 2 years later, I said, "Listen, I was doing commercial real estate. I was enjoying it, but it wasn't creative enough for me." And so I decided to jump on the entrepreneurial bandwagon of a trend that I was seeing, which was the idea of boutique hotels as a more experiential hospitality choice beyond the chain hotels. And thank God I did it pretty well and loved it. And every single one of the 52 hotels we created had a different name and brand, different identity, different customer base. Yeah, so that's how it all started.
and you said in your introduction before, you sold your business, in your early 50s, and having done the same, I know it's sometimes difficult to give up that baby that you've created,
Yeah.
you've sweated for, blood, sweat, and tears, nurtured through, and fighting bankruptcy in 2001, as you say. So, I mean, I think, was it a difficult decision for you to make, or was it
Well,
the right?
yeah, and the sale of the company was not till 2010, but I went through two once in a lifetime downturns in the same decade. 2001 to 2004 was the dot com bust in 9/11. And and much of what I wrote about in my book Peak was about that period. Um, and to be quite honest, I felt like a gladiator. I loved it. And yes, it was hard, and yes, we were in trouble at times, but we were doing better than all of our competitors.
Yeah.
And then there was the Great Recession, that ended 2004, 2005, and then the Great Recession started in 2008. It was like, oh my God! Like just as I got out of that bad time and had some good times, I was back in the bad times again. This time we were in the process of opening 15 hotels in 21 months. So it was a nutty time, and to be honest with you, I didn't want to be running that company anymore. I was running out of cash. I didn't feel like a gladiator. I felt like a prisoner, and that didn't feel good. And so, during that period of time, the NDE, the near death experience, was like a hotelier wake up call.
Yeah.
It was like the opportunity for me to just realize that I don't have to do it this way anymore. And thank God. I mean, it was like a little bit of divine intervention. I don't think you have to have a near death experience in order to make change in your midlife. And that's part of the reason ultimately why I created MEA. And we have had 5,200 people from 50 countries around the world. We have 28 regional chapters of people who just have come to MEA with the intention of saying, the average age is 54. I'm halfway through my adult life. I plan to live till 90, and 54 is halfway between 18 and 90. And these people are saying, I have as much adulthood ahead of me as I have behind me. What am I going to do with this time in my life?
Yeah.
And that's why through our courses on navigating transitions, cultivating purpose, and owning wisdom, we are in the business of helping people put on a new pair of glasses about how they want to live their life, whether they're an entrepreneur or not. We do attract a lot of entrepreneurs because I'm an entrepreneur, but it's by no means just entrepreneurs.
Yeah. We're going to get onto that. And I suppose this is a nice segue into that, because I think, obviously the creation of your boutique hotel brand and the hotels themselves, and then what followed with Airbnb, probably what a lot of people associate with your name when your name's mentioned.
Yeah.
I think what's really interesting there is, as you say, you were 52 when you were approached by the CEO, Brian Chesky, to be this in-house mentor, to grow this, what was a promising tech startup at the time,
Yeah.
into this global hospitality brand. But I'm interested in what fears or doubts you may have had when joining there, because as you say, you were maybe twice the age
Yeah.
of the average employee, and also it's about tech, and you're going into a totally new, different sector.
Yeah,
Uh,
you're giving me my answer. I mean, I to be quite honest, when I joined Airbnb and I spent my first couple days there, I was shocked. I'd never worked in a tech company before, and I knew there were a lot of young people, but I didn't know how pervasively it was young. And then they were using language I didn't understand, so I started making a list of all the words I didn't understand, so I could ask Brian about it later. So yeah, to be hired as the mentor and then to feel at times like the intern meant that I coined a term called the mentern, someone who is a combination of mentor and intern. So I was learning a lot of DQ, digital intelligence, from the younger people, and they were learning a lot of EQ, emotional intelligence, from me. And we were both better off for it. And over the course of the 7.5 years I was there, I had over 100 mentees, 100 people who looked to me over the course of that time as a guide, an advisor, somebody who could help them. But I got to say that what the experience I had was so nourishing because I learned so much from them as well.
yeah,
So in retrospect, I will have to say that there was a moment where I thought about quitting after a few weeks because I felt like, man, imposter syndrome here. Who am I to help these young brilliant tech people and designers to take a company global when my focus was only on the state of California? And I had to really be open to no longer being the CEO, so no longer calling the shots, but instead being the CEO whisperer, the whisperer who is helping Brian to become a great leader. And I'm
yeah,
really proud. Has Brian has no background in business. Of the Fortune 500, all the Fortune 500 CEOs, he's the only one who comes from a creative background. He went to the Rhode Island School of Design, and he was a designer. And so here's this guy who's running the most valuable hospitality company in the world with no background at all. So I feel a lot of like almost fatherly pride about what Brian has endured and how he has evolved as a leader. So yeah, it's been a beautiful journey.
well, I mean, he mentioned, I heard him say that, we hired Chip for his knowledge, but what we got was his wisdom, and
Yeah.
from that, and and all that life experience you can't buy, can you? I mean, it's so that whispering definitely worked. And I think what's interesting is, looking at Airbnb's core values. I know he's talked about and all the co-founders, talking about growth mindset, which they didn't have at all, and embrace the adventure is one of their core values, isn't it? So it's
Yes.
profound words from Brian, on how you helped, and I suppose a lot of learnings have been taken from this experience and put into this new book, which is, I suppose, taking me on to my next question. The new book, Learning to Love Midlife, and it couldn't have come at a better time for myself. I turned 50 this year, and with a bit of trepidation, I should say, about this milestone. But I took it upon myself to leave my agency, and that I'd run for 26 years, and crystallized my
Wow.
thoughts in terms of, there must be more to life than this. And so, what was the inspiration for you writing this book in the first instance?
Well, our stories are pretty similar. I love that. You had 26 years, I had 24 years, both of us around age 50. So I lost 5 male friends to suicide between 2008 and 2010. They were ages 42 to 52. 4 of them were a big surprise. One was less of a surprise, but 3 of the 5 were entrepreneurs who lost their companies during the Great Recession, and their whole sense of identity was wrapped up in the company. So, note to self: hey, midlife, we don't have enough schools or tools or rites of passage or rituals to help people through this time. And I had my rough time in that same era. I went into my 50s and I loved it. I was like, wow, this is interesting. And so in creating MEA, the Modern Elder Academy, I really wanted to try to become a midlife activist, which is a weird term, but to really be an activist for this era of life that is, doesn't get a lot of attention, even though it lasts forever. And so I really wanted to tap in writing the book. I wanted to tap into the over 5,000 people who've gone through the program, tell some of their stories, tell my story, but also then introduce a lot of the social science research that shows that, generally speaking, people get happier after age 50 with each decade getting better than the last. The research from Becca Levy at Yale, who shows that if you can shift your mindset on aging from a negative to a positive, you gain 7.5 years of additional life. That was amazing. And like, why doesn't the world know about
Absolutely.
these data points? And so I really wanted to write a book. And the subtitle of the book really says it all: 12 Reasons Why Life Gets Better with Age. Because we're very familiar about what gets worse with age, our wrinkled skin, our body not being quite the same, our short-term memory, etc. But what gets better with age? Everything from emotional intelligence to our pattern recognition, which leads to wisdom, to our ability to edit the things that we don't want in our life anymore. Our spiritual curiosity improves with age. And so I basically wanted to help take social science and popularize it and say,
Yeah.
yes, if you're getting older, let's look at the upside of aging. There is a downside for sure, but let's look at the upside as well, because if we can help you get to that place where you actually feel better about getting older, yeah, you're going to live longer.
I mean, it's a fabulous book. It's entertaining. It's easy to read, but it's educational as well. And I think just some of the things in there, you talk about life being this two-tank journey, and it makes sense when you think about it. The fact that we fuel ourselves up, education, relationships. Life is just hectic in the early stages, isn't it? And but how can that provide you with that energy, inspiration for a lifetime? We change, environments change,
Right.
and so you do need to stop, refill, maybe reset the compass, and head off in a different direction. So yeah, and as you
Well,
say, then
and that analogy, I'm sorry, that metaphor is really speaks to this idea that, yeah, we fuel up with all that education, in our high school and college years and maybe graduate school years. And then we sort of almost feel like, okay, I'm supposed to use all of that education from 30 years ago for what I'm doing today. And in a world that is constantly changing and there's
yeah,
all kinds of new information, to actually be able to spend some time, let's say in your 50s, where you can say, okay, what do I want to learn now? And the learning doesn't have to be just skills. There's a lot of talk about reskilling people as they get older. it's also learning about what's important to you. I mean, there's a reason that you left your agency after all these years.
Yeah.
And it sounds to me like it had a lot to do with things that were beyond the tangible, obvious. And it was more of the intangible. And it was more of some of the things that you felt you wanted to do. One of my favorite questions to ask is 10 years from now, what will you regret if you don't learn it or do it now?
Yeah.
Because it becomes a catalyst. That question becomes a catalyst for me at age 57 a few years ago to learn how to learn Spanish because I was living in Mexico, and to learn how to surf because I was living next to a surf break. Now, my mindset might have been like, I'm too old for this, but the anticipated regret of knowing that 10 years from then, I'll regret if I don't learn these now. Anticipated regret is a form of wisdom. And
Mhm.
so I part of the reason I wanted to write the book and create MEA is to help people with thoughtful, provocative questions that were going to help them look at their life with a new pair of glasses in the middle of their life.
B2B Frameworks is a curated collection of proven business frameworks to develop your strategic thinking skills, solve your biggest business problems, and unlock your next promotion. Our mission is to help you achieve these goals. We want to create the next generation of successful business leaders by providing the tools and frameworks needed to create effective strategies that drive business growth. Each framework comes with a downloadable set of instructions with large, colourful diagrams and editable templates to guide you through the process step by step and prompt you to consider the problem from every possible angle. Along with audio guides and educational tools, our extensive content library is full of real-world examples and case studies of strategic thinking in action. So why learn with B2B Frameworks? We've carefully curated only the most effective, proven business and marketing frameworks. Our downloadable materials and audio guides will help you easily apply each framework. And the insights and advice you'll find across the site are based on 30 years of consulting experience from one of the world's leading business strategy experts, Paul Haig. B2B Frameworks is a small investment to advance your career or grow your business. Start your journey to becoming a successful business leader by joining B2B Frameworks today. We have got a lot in that's similar actually, Chip, because I've got a finca in Mallorca and I want to spend more time over there, but I don't learn I can't speak Spanish, so that is one of the boxes I need to tick. So that's a goal for me that I'm starting this year. But you're right. I mean, and these decisions don't come easy. I remember making the decision on where I wanted, hopefully, to take my life. But it was 8 years ago. It was sat with a friend on the side of Lake Tarpo, just having a beer. The kids were playing in the water, and took that decision from there. But it doesn't happen overnight sometimes, neither. So you do need to plan these things, don't you, in advance? So you've already mentioned your book has this subtitle, 12 Reasons Why Life Gets Better with Age, and you split these into 5 different lives. So I'm going to cherry pick a few of these as we go through, but starting with the physical life, I think what's really interesting from the social science background is that our social scientists say that we used to have this 3-act play split into 8,000 days. So the first act up to 21, age 21, then second into our mid-40s, and then finally to our 65th birthday, where we retire and then soon a trophy and die.
And then die.
Yeah, I mean, it's no wonder that we look at midlife as a crisis point, is it? When we look at it like that. But I think your example of Airbnb and, in your 50s, what a fabulous example of how midlife should be viewed. It's not the beginning of the end, but in fact, we've still got a whole lot more to give.
I guess it's the end of the beginning. And that's the interesting part, is what comes after the beginning. And our physical life, we underestimate how much longevity we have ahead of us. We don't have very good longevity literacy. When we see that the average UK man lives till 76 and you're 70 years old, you think you only have 6 years left. But if you've already made it to 70, you don't look at those averages, because you've made it beyond a lot of other people who have not made it to 70. So you probably can make it to 84 So you have 8 additional years of life if you've already made it to 70. It's 8 additional years beyond the average. So that's really one piece of that section of the book. The other piece is learning to see our body as a rental vehicle that we're supposed to take good care of for long-term maintenance, but not for short-term vanity. And, in our 20s and our 30s and maybe even our 40s, there was a certain amount of vanity about wanting to keep your body up. And sometimes it was for just being in good shape and, just the sense of accomplishment. And that's all good. But for a lot of people, it's actually to look good for, fill in the blank, the reason, because they're dating or because they want to turn heads or whatever. And to get to a place in your life where you say, I'm relieved that my body isn't the only thing that defines me. I think it's more relevant to women than for men. It doesn't have to be just body. It could be body and looks. And it doesn't mean then you just let yourself fall apart. It just means that the motivation is more long-term maintenance than it is short-term vanity.
Yeah. Yeah. I thought it was interesting in the book, in the physical section, actually, because I suppose times have changed. If I think back to my grandparents, they always wore jackets and shirts, off sometimes a bow tie, even when it was casual. I mean, it's just how times have changed.
Mm-hmm.
But you mentioned in your book about the fact that the characters in the Sex and the City sequel are the
Yeah.
same age as the Golden Girls in the TV
Yeah.
series in 1985. And I used to watch that as a kid, and I'm thinking, oh my God, when I was younger, I used to sit thinking what these grandmas on about, and
Yeah.
they're only in the 50s. So it's amazing as we get older and our perceptions change.
Yeah, and just our fashions and just our point of view and how we talk, and I think interesting point. You sort of alluded to it earlier. There was a time where people sort of got to 65 and then they retired. Now, over time, that number has declined. It's actually going back up again. But I'd love to do a study and say, like, when the average age of retirement was 65 and the average age of longevity was 70, you basically got 5 years after that. Then we've gotten to a place where the average retirement age is now 60 and the average longevity is 80. So we've gone from 5 additional years to 20 additional years. And for many people, way more than 20 years. So this is a new life stage. I mean, the post-retirement era or the retirement era, and let's also be clear, like, most of these people are not retired. They're like retired from the full-time job they had for a long time. And now they do this on the side and they do that on the side. They have a portfolio life of things because, quite frankly, if you're a knowledge worker, it's not like your brain is no longer functional at age 60. It's probably maybe more functional than it's ever been. And
Yeah.
therefore, wow, can you be valuable? So in many ways, our thinking about retirement goes back to the factory days when people were using their bodies and you were just tired out and your brain was bored. And at age 60 or 65, you could not imagine wanting to work anymore. And your body was falling apart on you. And that's not what a knowledge worker is all about. So, it's a completely different era.
Well, tied to that, we all know what adolescence means, but you've coined a few words in the book, but and you mentioned one before, but one that I'd never heard of before was Middlescence.
Yeah.
Can you expand on what you mean by that for the listeners?
So adolescence as a life stage didn't exist until 1904. The language around adolescence is relatively modern in that sense. Prior to that, if you hit puberty, you were an adult. Or when you hit puberty, you were an adult. And so there's a big difference. But adolescence is then seen as a life stage that's a liminal life stage. It's a transitional life stage between childhood and adulthood. And as a transitional stage, it's full of all kinds of transitions, including hormonal, emotional, physical, and identity transitions. Middlescence is the life stage in between adulthood, the core of adulthood, and the start of elderhood. And elderhood could last 30 years. It's not being elderly, it just means that typically you're older than the people around you. And we go through all kinds of hormonal, emotional, physical, and identity transitions during middlescence. But unlike adolescence, which has a social infrastructure to support people through all those transitions and rites of passage and rituals, there's nothing for people in midlife.
Yeah.
And so Middlescence is really missing that. And so that's part of the reason I'm trying to popularize some new words.
Yeah. Well, and then the book, it moves on to talk about the emotional part of life, and of what you just mentioned, some of that there. And I found one particular study that you referenced. It's the Harvard study of adult development that showed that people who were most satisfied in their relationships at 50 were the healthiest at 80. In other words, relationships not only do keep us happier, but they keep us healthier too. So, I mean, there you go, listeners. It's not about being rich, famous, or even the number of likes you get on your Instagram post that leads to happiness. So, did any of that surprise you? I mean, not the Instagram post liking, but
Yeah, no, I mean, what surprised me is that this isn't better known. And pretty much, whether it's the Blue Zones folks, Dan Buettner, and they're our partners in MEA that we do programs with them, or it's Phil Pizzo at Stanford, or Bob Waldinger at Harvard, they all say the same thing, which is that the number one variable for living a longer, healthier, happier life is your social wellness in midlife. And most of us don't think of friendship as a practice, but if you think of friendship as a practice, as something you can get better at and something that you actually invest in, then all of a sudden you realize you have better friendships. And I'm speaking to you men out there. Women are actually pretty good at this, partly because they were socialized at a young age to be vulnerable and open with their friends. Men, on the other hand, struggle with this. And in their 20s, 30s, and 40s, when they're so busy, we are so busy, um, you often atrophy your friendships. And then you get into your 50s and you feel a little bit alone, or often you feel like there's stuff going on inside of you, but you don't know who to talk to about it. And this is very familiar, knowing that my 5 friends took their own lives between 42 and
mm,
52, including one whose name is Chip. Like, he has the same name that I have. He was one of my best friends, and he was the person I would go to for spiritual advice. So when I found out that he took his own life, it just shocked me. But in reading his suicide note, I could see that he felt very alone in what he was feeling. And we're not alone. I mean, lots of us are going through very similar things at the same time.
yeah,
But if we're men, we're less likely to actually talk about it or share about it, or we actually, in some ways, feel defective as a man, because men are supposed to have it all together and
yeah,
not cry and not, feel like they're weak, etc. And that kind of masculinity will mean that people are masking their emotions, and when you do that, there's some toxic physical and emotional effects to that.
yeah, yeah, for sure. Maybe it's my age, or maybe it's because I'm becoming less tolerant of idiots as you get older. But I love the chapter called "I Have No More Fucks Left to Give." Um,
Fox, no more fox, no
no
more
more.
fox left to give.
That's the Northern English coming through there.
Yeah, I like it. I've no more
Both.
fucks left to give. What, you bloke, and what are you thinking? And you're telling me about? Yeah, so that's a beautiful one. That's chapter 5 in the book. Also in the emotional section of the book, and there's a lot of data on this. Once we get to midlife, we care a little bit less about what other people think about us, and especially the people we don't really care about. When you're younger, you're like 15. Also, you sort of get to a place where you realize that, like, the things that used to totally stress you out because you think it would, like, fuck with you the rest of your life, it's like, you know what, no, it's like, that's a small bump, I'll get through it. And you
Yeah,
realize that you've gotten through these things before. And so, long story short, is it's really interesting that one of the reliefs of getting to midlife and later is to realize, I am living my life for myself. It
yeah.
doesn't mean I have to be selfish. I can be out there giving a fuck about a bunch of stuff, but I'm not going to give a fuck about everything. And I am going to just focus on my fucks on on those that deserve it.
Absolutely, absolutely. Well, and I think, like you say yes to everything before you're 40, and say no to everything, after you're 40. But make those priorities, and I think I love it, because over the course of your lifetime, I suppose you feel more comfortable, don't you, saying no rather than in the past. You say it because you feel obliged to please everyone. But as
Yeah,
whether it's that time's running out and we want to spend our time doing things that we love.
And there are ways to say no in gracious ways. So, and quite frankly, sometimes you think you're going to say no and you're going to like end a friendship by doing it, and you realize like the other person says, "Oh, thank God you said no."
Yeah.
But it's yeah, it to learn how, just as you get comfortable in your own skin, it starts to sag, and it is around midlife that we get comfortable in our own skin.
Yeah. Yeah, no, definitely. I think life, thinking about, you become wiser with age, don't you? But life is definitely the wrong way round, isn't it? You race around like dogs early on. I've been balancing work, growing a business. My wife, don't spend enough time with her, the kids, and then they grow up. And surely that time will be better spent with our family. So it's about getting that balance for sure.
Hmm.
Um, in business, everyone knows what ROI, return on investment, means, and it's banded around the world with people obsessing over, growth, making more profit. Um, but I love your new definition of ROI that you're now focused on delivering in the second half of your life. Can you tell our listeners what your ROI stands for, and what others do in order to leave this lasting legacy of their life?
Yeah, the second half of your life, I think you move from, I am my stuff, I am my business card, I am what people say about me, and the shift is to I am what survives me. And as you think about that, it doesn't necessarily have to be your name on a building at a university. It literally could be just being a great mentor to someone, or having kids or grandkids that just love you because of the influence that you've had. So I recoined ripples of return on investment to ripples of impact. And actually, I didn't coin it. I heard it from someone else, and then I've just been popularizing it. So ripples of impact basically means I do something, and the effect it has is powerful because of the fact it has a catalytic or contagious effect on others. And that's really exactly why I do MEA today. It has an effect on others, and they then have an effect on others that I've never met. So I do think this is one of the things that is really important in the second half of our life, to actually transcend all of the pettiness of the ego, to move into this place of being a little bit more soul focused or a little bit more service focused in the world. It feels really good.
We talked about the fact that more and more people are living to 100 years old. And in fact, you state in your book that 50% of US business owners are over 55 years old. That's a lot of people becoming entrepreneurs in the sunset of their careers. However, what is strange is that most companies don't have this longevity strategy, even though employees that are 50 and above are the fastest growing demographic in the workplace population. And in another of your books, Wisdom at Work, that I've got behind me, you talk about the experience dividend. What can companies do to become a more age friendly employer?
You know, um, Age should be a metric for diversity, just like race, ethnicity, gender, sexual orientation, because it is a very relevant diversity metric. Because young brains and older brains operate differently. A young brain has fluid intelligence, fast and focused. An older brain has crystallized intelligence, thinks more systemically and holistically. So therefore, you have a team of people of different generations. You have different ways of looking at things, and we can learn from each other. Wisdom is not taught; it's shared. So the imperative about doing this makes sense. Why don't more companies do it? Partly because it's a relatively new thing. We have 5 generations in the workplace for the first time.
Yeah.
That's one reason. Another reason is because, like, the fact that as of next year, the majority of Americans will have a younger boss. That's very new. Let's go back 20 years, and like 90% of people had an older boss.
Yeah.
10% of older people had a younger boss. So we've moved into a new era very quickly, and in some cases, the younger managers could use the wisdom of a direct report who's older, who can teach them a few things along the way, and so that makes sense. And so I have a whole chapter in Wisdom at Work about the 10 things that any company can do. But like just a few examples are: number one, do the metrics. Look at age as a diversity metric and measure for it. Number two is create mutual mentorship in a company. Help people to learn from each other and often across generations. Thirdly, create a wisdom heat map. Look at, ask a question on your employee satisfaction surveys, which is beyond your boss, who do you look to for advice or wisdom? And see who are the informal mentors in the company. It'll not only tell you they're valuable, you'll also look at the characteristics and qualities of those people and say, like, how do we hire for that? How do we train for that? And how do we even look at some of these folks who are some of our most popular informal mentors and see if they could be an in-house coach? So
Yeah.
there's a lot of things companies can do. And so I've just sort of touched on the surface in that book. But with people staying in the workplace longer, and that's going to continue to happen, this is a really important topic.
Yeah, it really is, and a really important book as well. So, if you haven't read it, I'd recommend it to our listeners that you read that too. This podcast is sponsored by B2B Frameworks, and throughout all your time in the hospital, well, going back to Stanford and then in the hospitality business, working at Airbnb, and now setting up and running Modern Elder Academy, I'm sure you've used various different business frameworks to guide decisions and strategy over time. Which business framework would have helped you the most, do you think? Could you say one?
Well, my favorite business framework is the peak model of
I was
how
going to
you,
say it had to be Maslow.
yeah, how you apply Maslow to organizations. It's so valuable, and it's something that I stumbled upon and created, really, based upon reading Maslow late in his life, uh, including reading his diaries. So I think that one's a good one, because one of the most neglected facts in business is that we're all human, and we
Yeah,
forget about that. Um, so that's one. I'd say other frameworks that really matter to me. I think any stakeholder focused framework that looks at not just the shareholders, but also looks at the variety of stakeholders and how do they have a voice without creating anarchy. I think that any of those programs are I find or any of those frameworks I find to be helpful as well.
yeah, yeah. To conclude, Chip, I'd like to enter the quick fire round of questions I ask all my guests.
Yeah.
We've shifted scene, but I can see some books on the bookshelf behind you there.
Yes.
So,
My favorite book is The Cocktail Chameleon.
well, that was my first question. Well, I suppose what are you reading at the moment? But
My favorite book at the moment is, because I'm reading usually multiple books at once, is Dacher Keltner's book. He's a MEA faculty member and a UC Berkeley professor, on awe. The title of the book is just AWE, awe. And the reason I love this book is because finding awe and cultivating awe in your life is one of the fastest ways to feeling a sense of happiness and joy. And it's surprising, based upon his research, about what brings awe to someone. And it's not just nature. Nature would be the obvious one. But the number one and number two ways that people feel awe in their life have to do with their interactions with other people. So
yeah.
I find that to be a very inspiring book because of the work I do at MEA.
And a specific business book, which would you recommend? What's had a most profound impact on you when you've read it?
I mean, I liked the book Tribal Leadership that came out 15 years ago. I found that to be very enlightening. So that probably would be my favorite business book.
Yeah. What's the best piece of business advice you've ever been given?
Uh, Look for the niche. If you're starting a small business, go after the niche first, because the bigger companies aren't giving time to it, and you can serve the niche better. And that's exactly what I did with my boutique hotel company.
I thought you said itch then at first, but niche and very niche, yeah.
Or it could be bitch. Like, you focus on the bitch.
And which business leader do you most admire?
Herb Kelleher, who's passed away. He was my pen pal for 10 years. He was the former CEO for 37 years of Southwest Airlines in the United States. And just an epic role model leader who cared so much about his employees.
Yeah. My previous agency, actually, we did the research for the rebrand of Southwest.
Oh,
Uh,
wow. Nice.
with Heart under the planes and everything else, and
Yeah.
it was fascinating piece of research. Traveling my colleagues were doing it over in the States, but traveling the country, speaking to consumers and business travelers about what they loved about, and there's some fabulous stories that came back.
Yeah.
And finally, who would you like me to reach out to and invite to come on this podcast in the future?
Seth Godin, but he won't do it.
I've spoken to Seth a few times, actually, and he's, you need to do a year, 2 years in advance with Seth.
Wait, have you actually done a podcast with him yet, though?
I've spoken to him and it's never worked. So over the course of the last 2 years, I've got his email address and I've spoken to him via email.
Yeah, that would be my first choice because I think he's a great podcast guest, but he doesn't do it very often anymore. How about Dan Buettner from the Blue Zones? He might be an interesting person to talk to, especially as you're now going into your 50s.
Yeah, well, I'll reach out and see if I can twist his arm on that, because I definitely love the Netflix series of what he puts together there. So, Chip, well, we've talked about various different books of yours today, but the one that we've focused on in particular, it's a wonderful book that helps people as we reach our midlife. And hopefully, what's become clear today is that we don't get to choose between youth and aging. Growing and aging are the same thing, and it's a privilege to grow old. So therefore, we need to stop treating midlife as a crisis and more of this crossroads, whether that's in business or in our personal lives. Midlife is this life stage that so deeply misunderstood, until now. But this book will not only help you reimagine what your midlife can look like, but hopefully, stir your brain, transform some ideas that you can take into the second part of your life. So thanks for joining me today, Chip. If our listeners do want to get in touch with you, how best should they do that?
So the MEA website is meawisdom.com, and I have a blog on there, a daily blog called Wisdom Well, and you're welcome to subscribe to that for free, and you get a daily email from me. I'm on LinkedIn, and I put a lot of my blog posts there. And then there's chipconley.com is my personal website.
Fabulous. Well, I've thoroughly enjoyed this. I do hope we meet again, and hopefully face-to-face next time.
I'd love that.
In Santa Fe. I've been looking at your website with the academy and everything with a lot of eagerness. So, whether it's on the beach in Baja or, one of your other campuses, then that would be great.
Beautiful. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chip.